Australia is dragging its feet when it comes to the Magnitsky Act. Isn't that right, Pete?
Oh, yeah, the Magnitsky Act. That was my favourite show at this year's Adelaide Fringe, actually.
No, it's not a weird magician. It's not a sublime chess move either. It's actually a powerful global legal movement that holds all the world's baddies to account.
I think you mean that.
The Magnitsky Act is named after this bloke, Russian lawyer Sergei Magnitsky. In 2007, Sergei was hired by American financier Bill Browder to work out why Russian police were swarming over his office in Moscow.
Sergei was probably the smartest lawyer I knew in Russia.
Sergei discovered that corrupt Russian government officials were scheming to see if a $230 million tax payment made legitimately by Browder could actually be refunded back into their own grubby little pockets. It was tax fraud backed by the Kremlin.
In Russia, organized crime is merged into the government.
Locked up for almost a year, Magnitsky was tortured and ultimately killed by a government who believed it had acted with impunity.
They chained him to a bed and 8 riot guards with rubber batons beat him to death.
He was 37 years old. He left a wife and 2 children.
To hold the bastards accountable in 2012, the US government, with Bill Browder's help, passed the Magnitsky Act, legislation designed specifically to target and hurt the individuals responsible right where they'd hurt most, their wallets.
The imposition of the Magnitsky Act in the US in 2012 had a huge impact. It targeted individuals, froze their US bank accounts.
It was like an Exocet missile going right into the heart of what they cared about, their money abroad.
18 Russian officials were identified and banned from entering the US, banned from using its banking system, and banned from holding any assets in the country. Yeah, Putin was kind of miffed.
Son of a bitch.
But in 2016, the law was expanded globally, meaning anyone in the world who was guilty of corruption and/or gross human rights abuses could find themselves on the US Magnitsky list.
We thought it was important that they know that there's a consequence to their behaviour.
They could now be personally held to account, punished financially, their bank accounts frozen, property seized, visas cancelled. It also meant fewer sanctions were imposed on nations as a whole, which meant only the bad guys felt the sting, not innocent citizens.
This sent shockwaves around the world and sent a clear message that there would be consequences.
Tightening the noose, other countries have since joined in with their versions of Magnitsky Acts.
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Gibraltar.
The EU, the UK and Canada now all add horrendous human beings to their lists, and banks duly comply by locking them out. It works.
We can have what people call the Magnitsky effect, which is offering a deterrent.
17 thugs after the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, Magnitsky. Burmese military leaders complicit in atrocities against the Rohingya, Magnitsky. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam after supporting China's restrictive national security laws. She was Magnitsky.
I'm using cash every day. The government is paying me cash on my salary because I don't have a bank account.
In fact, Magnitsky sanctions have been used to great effect in the Maldives, South Sudan, Uganda, Cambodia, Belarus, Uzbekistan and Pakistan, to name but a few.
This shows the power of the regime and the effect that it can have.
I believe one thing is clear. The international community cannot simply look the other way.
On Monday, Britain, Canada and the EU joined the US in slapping Magnitsky sanctions on 4 Chinese government officials responsible for the persecution of Uyghurs in Xinjiang province.
The sanctions involve travel bans. The individuals are barred from entering the UK. Any assets found in the UK will be frozen.
And yeah, China is miffed too.
Stop lecturing others on human rights and interfering in their internal affairs.
So back home, it makes sense that lately we're seeing full ads like this in our papers. Human rights groups and concerned Aussies want Australia to implement our version of a Magnitsky Act to prevent us becoming a safe haven for devious despots and dirty money.
I think it's time that Australia joined the club.
And it gives Australia the huge moral authority to say that people who do terrible things shouldn't come in.
Last December, with input from Amal Clooney, a bipartisan parliamentary inquiry recommended we write one up.
You can send a message to those who engage in corruption and human rights abuses that Australia's banks and schools and beaches are off limits.
So while they may not be held accountable in their home countries, we can effect some form of punishment and deterrence here in Australia.
You know, if the United States and the UK and Canada have it, then the bad guys will just keep their money in Australia.
$3.5 million of the $230 million uncovered by Magnitsky himself has been tracked to Australian bank accounts. So with our own act, we could apply the squeeze to the jerks who thought they could hide it here. But our government appears to be in no rush.
A Magnitsky Act. We haven't got a time
frame at the moment.
We don't have a time frame, Senator.
It is with government for consideration. I've written to the Prime Minister.
Okay, that's disappointing because I think I had heard by the end of the first quarter was anticipated. But okay.
Australia could lead the world in terms of the types of human rights abuse that we target. We could go beyond extrajudicial killings and war crimes and look at labour exploitation, the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation. These are the kinds of cases that we could be taking action on here in Australia if we had a Magnitsky Act.
There's a lot of talk in America about broadening this to the whole world. And if that becomes the new technology for fighting impunity, then I think that Sergei's death won't have been a meaningless death, that perhaps his death might save some lives somewhere else.
It's really fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
It's really fascinating because it's better than sanctions, isn't it? Because there's so many innocent, victims when a whole country gets sanctions put against it.
And very often not the guilty people.
Exactly
they often
right.
survive the sanctions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how far could it go? Like, could it go as far as individual crimes, murder?
But I think that's part of the problem. I mean, it's so open-ended. I mean, that's the legal issue, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why the government's being a little bit patient about whether they do it.
Also, isn't it up to then the foreign minister to decide who's sanctioned, but it's up to the foreign minister to keep diplomatic relationships smooth? So then it's a bit of a conflict to say.
Well, unless you could, I suppose you don't have to follow exactly that model. You could probably try to come up with a different model. I don't know. I think the thing about it, though, is at its worst, it just becomes another way of doing politics, right? You would never impose it on an American or whatever, but you will impose it on someone who's Chinese or whatever. And so I can see there'd be reluctance. But the point is to compare it to sanctions, I think.
Yeah.
Because that's blunt, and that is politics by certain means, and it often doesn't work, and it punishes the wrong people.
Absolutely.
So,
OK, we've got to take a break. We'll see you on the other side. Stay with us.